Thank you, Judge. Actually, I must say that I first came out of practice. I did appear before. The time we call him VC George, Datuk VC George, High Court Judge. And he was actually a racist, I must tell you that. No? I first appeared before him. We normally, when we appear, this happened in chambers. We normally introduce ourselves. So I said, I'm Kayveas. My little friend was the late Segran, who was just murdered recently. He was the one who appeared with me. And first thing the judge said, Kayveas, are you a Malayali? That's the first question he asked me. Here with his MIC struggling not to talk about caste, and then there you are getting my judge here.
Can I explain? Datuk Kayveas is such a good-looking fellow. I said he must be a Malayali.
Thank you, Jay. I think there's something with the name. The second time I appeared with the same person, the late Segran and myself again, he said, Kayveas, I'm not going to listen to you. You listen to me. Both of you go outside and settle the matter. I'm not going to do that. That's my first experience with him. And he was one of those very highly respected judges who we really like to appear. I used to hear a joke or just like to share with you quickly. So I'm not going to speak too long. I just got my points to say. I heard this, but I have not witnessed it in his court. It happened, it seems. When it's High Court judge, we say, my lord. Those days we used to speak in English. And there was one lady, young girl who appeared, kept on saying, Your Honor. Your Honor, we refer to magistrates actually. He kept on saying, Your Honor, and then the judge felt a little bit not so comfortable when everybody else calling him my lord. He stopped, paused and said, it seems, look here young lady, if you like it, you can call me George. So I must tell you a little bit of his past. So let me come back to this constitution. I see he's watching closely the time. Separation of powers. I've been just called yesterday, so I didn't really have any prepared text, but this is one of my favorite topics anyway. So I can just share with you. When we say separation of powers, what you need to understand is, students especially, some of you are students, you want to understand what it is separation of powers. It's just simply telling the people who make the law, the people who enforce the law, and the people who interpret the law. Okay, people who make the law, parliament, legislature, the people who enforce the law, or implement, you can call it, are the executive, cabinet ministers, downline. I'll come a little bit more on that. And then the people who interpret the law, that is the judges. When we say separation of powers, my understanding simply is, just mind your own business. You just mind your own business. You do your thing, we do our thing. You don't interfere in our business. That is what we say, separation of powers. You keep your power to yourself. If you are Prime Minister, Cabinet and the Executive, you don't interfere with the judiciary. You don't tell the judge what to decide, how to decide, who to put in or who to let go, something like that, to speak colloquially. And similarly, you don't tell Parliament, okay, this is how the law should be, this is how you decide the law. Or when the paper comes in, like a bill, you really totally agree on the bill. Bill, some of you don't understand or don't know yet. Bill is before it is passed as an act or a law, before it becomes an act of Parliament, before it is passed as a law, any act, it could be Child Protection Act, or Police Act or any of these acts, before it comes as a form of a bill to the Parliament, and then they do the debating and so on. It goes through various stages before it finally reaches the Senate, and then the King signs and says yes, it becomes law. So that bill stage, you don't interfere. But here we have a situation whether each of us are minding our own business or we are infringing into others' business, or we are using our powers in one area to control the other body. For example, in the executive, when you say, you always remember this, Prime Minister, Cabinet and those people, right? Whether Prime Minister says, okay, this is the Ministry of Defence, you do a bill for a particular law in this form, and then you send it to Parliament. And whether Parliament now says, all these people, the Member of Parliament, the young Brahmins who are elected there, whether they debate the bill and they have the bond to reject it, don't agree with it, or they simply say yes, okay, go through, and then they send to the Senate, and Senate becomes another rubber stamping body. You know, they say yes, okay, we pass through. And we have a law again, the King cannot totally refuse to sign. He can't actually, alright, he can say, but then automatically after a certain period, it still becomes law. So this is the separation of powers that we are talking, and for you to understand whether in Malaysia, are the powers separated? Our judiciary, our legislature, parliament, and of course the executive, which is people in the cabinet. That is what you need to understand. Since this forum is about constitution and understanding the constitution, I must refer you to the constitution. If we look at the federal constitution, those of you who brought it, or if you want to just make a note, it starts with part 4, the federation, where they talk about the Supreme Head as chapter 1. You skip that, you go to chapter 3. Right? You just mark Federal Constitution part 4 under Federation, chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the executive. It talks about cabinet, deputy ministers, and so on. We used to have parliamentary secretaries, now we don't have. They can always have it later on. Then it talks about chapter 4, federal legislature. That talks about parliament and so on. Now, reasons like what Maha said, we were not here when this thing was formed, so I won't know myself. On to relationship between states, and then part goes on somewhere else. Then you go back to chapter 7. You go back to chapter 7, sorry, part 7 actually, and then you come to part 8, it goes to elections. Then in part 9, we touch on judiciary. So this is the area, it is split in that way in the constitution. So you start with the executive, they talk about legislature, and then in somewhere else, after a few chapters, then you get the judiciary coming in as part 6. These are the 3 areas in the constitution.